the Sailor Moon Wig, a rather intimidating endeavor for the beginner, unless you just buy it. Anyways, this was a character I never saw myself cosplaying as personally until I borrowed a wig at Colossal Con, and then this over-filtered beast right here, and after seeing how these pictures turned out, I kind of realized I probably could be some variation of Sailor Moon. But when I tried to stub my wig in the past, I kind of had a problem where I forgot that wigs are not hair, and in doing so made the stub a little too thick. So, did I ruin my wig? We'll see. Now, before we continue, it's important to note that this is absolutely not a tutorial. So in order to soften the hot glue that I'd used to secure my stubs in the past, I have to try to soften it with a hairdryer. Now this wig is Fairy Blonde Chibi Wig from Arta Wigs, which I personally find to be the most magical Sailor Moon color there can be. While I'm trying to remove the hot glue, I'm also working to try to take out the hair ties I had put in place to hold it there. Apparently I did a pretty good job, which I'm surprised about. Eventually I grab scissors and just start cutting the hair tie out, because who really has time for this? It's worth noting there's also some thread in there somewhere that's also holding the hair ties together. I start pulling tufts of hair out of the glue in motions perhaps rougher than I should with a wig like this, but this has been a long time coming and it needs to go. The glue actually came off in relatively large chunks, though. I eventually managed to free the pigtail from the gobs of hot glue that had held it in place and start running a comb through it to try to get all the remaining chunks out of there. You can see that the cut job doesn't look great, but I never intended for this to be seen. Next, I'm needed to separate the outside layer of the hair from the rest of it. I'm going to have to be cutting a lot from the inside part of the pigtail to thin it out a little bit, but I have to make sure the outside remains just long enough to go into the stubbed pigtail. I'm not entirely successful with this, but we'll talk about how I managed to address that issue later. I also find myself needing to double and triple check the bangs that I've got sectioned off here, so that I have plenty of hair to work with for Sailor Moon's big, puffy bangs. This is something I will definitely be addressing in a future video, but for now, you'll just have to be content with this. You'll see that I'm going through and cutting down along the length. The idea behind this is to make sure that there's no clear lines beneath the strands once they're pulled up into the stubby pigtail. I know that a lot of this is very much out of frame. Sorry, I'm still a noob in all of this. Next, you'll see where I'm starting to try to train the wig hair back into the pigtails I had them in before, while still keeping the bangs separate. I had to soften the line between the bangs and the rest of the wig because I felt it was too harsh and artificial looking, so I kind of divided the difference, so to speak. I don't quite know how to explain that here just yet. Here you'll see that I realized at this point, even though it's still horribly out of frame, sorry, that some of the hair will not be long enough to go back into the pigtail. So I brushed it flat in my hand and used some hairspray to try to trick it into sticking together so it would all go up nicely into an updo. Anyway, this will later be secured with like hair glue and whatnot, but for now I decided to content myself with the Got2b glued hairspray, which is, by the way, one of the greatest things to happen to wigs in all time, if you ask me. So this is more training hair to stick upward like I need it to. Eventually I get everything up into its stubby little pigtail. Not that you can tell from here, because I'm horrible at framing at this point, but I'm going to need you to take my word for it. I take about 3 rubber bands and secure the pigtail with that, which doesn't hold up, but you'll see that later. And then I take a little bit of fabric glue and put it on the end of the pigtail. This is then wrapped up in parchment paper because it doesn't stick to anything. But since parchment paper doesn't stick to anything, I'm going to have to secure it to the wig block in general with some straight pins. I'm going to leave this to dry for a couple of days though. So I return to this a couple of days later, as I mentioned just a second ago, and to my horror I find my rubber bands have broken. I don't know how this happened, and frankly I don't care. So I start taking the hair glue, which by the way is not the gel formula because that tends to not work as well on synthetic hair, and I start kind of smoothing it in there with my fingertip, though I'm going to have to rubber band it anyways. I go over it with a little water spritzer as well to kind of move the glue around a little bit. Once this dries, it'll be reasonably solid, so I'm not too worried about it, but I need to find some rubber bands. I do ultimately manage to find some little black rubber bands in the depths of my backpack, and once it's secure, I go and cut off that little fabric glue tail that formed in the parchment paper. Ultimately, I'm satisfied with how many rubber bands I've managed to find to put into this pigtail and go over it with some hairspray. Using my fingertips, I make sure to catch all the strays and flyaways that are all over the place, and then I go in with little fingertips of hair glue to try to secure the base of the pigtail. This is given a pretty thick layer right under the rubber band, since 1, it'll dry clear, and 2, it'll help secure all the hair to make sure it stays in place, including those shorter ones I had an issue with earlier. While she's a little lumpy, I can definitely say that my Odongo are definitely going to be fitting on here a lot easier, because with the larger ones I was having to cut away nearly 1/3 of the styrofoam ball base in order to make it fit. Here you'll see that I'm using a hairdryer to further harden this, and then after that, my stubbing should be complete. So that's where I'm at right now with this project. I went ahead and did the other side, and I'm much happier with the ponytails of this one than I was in the prior attempts. I feel like I can actually make reasonably sized Odongo to go on top of these. It's undecided yet as to whether or not I'm going to make these detachable. I've got 2 schools of thought on this. The first is that I add magnets so I can just add the gems as needed to the front of the Odongo in case I decide to be Sailor Moon or Princess Serenity or whatever I decide to do. The other school of thought is that I have interchangeable Odongo, so I would need to put a magnet in the top of the pigtail and then in the styrofoam ball and just change out the Odongo as needed. But I've got time to play with that, so we'll see how that goes. Either way, this is something that has actually been weighing on me for quite some time, so I'm glad to have finally gotten in and fixed it. Next, I'll have to construct the Odongo and, of course, do the bangs, but once the wig is complete, I feel like I'll have made a major step in this costume in general, so keep watching if you're interested to see how this goes. Thanks for watching so far. Now, if you'd like to see me work on stuff in real time or some of my old cosplays, be sure to check me out on Instagram at KesraKyse. That's KesraKyse. Or if you would like to help support my work and my channel and everything, I can be found at Kesra Crafts on Etsy, where I make fandom keychains and wire wrap jewelry for the most part. And there's a little chainmail there too. If nothing else, be sure to like the video and go ahead and tap the subscribe button, and I will be putting out videos whenever I have something to show you guys. We'll work on the consistency later. Anyways,